I fell into depression after my parents left me in foster care at 12 to travel with my sister. Now they're unemployed, desperate, and looking for help, so I gave them exactly what they deserved. My name is Isabelle. I grew up in Georgia, in a pale yellow two-story house with a white picket fence and a small garden full of lavender, my mother's favorite. From the outside, everything looked so perfect it could have been printed on a postcard. But inside, I lived as if I were a guest unwelcome, barely acknowledged. I was the eldest of two daughters. My younger sister, Haley, 3 years apart, was the shining gem, the ray of hope, the princess of light, as my mother so often called her. Wherever Haley went, all attention naturally followed. My mother would kneel down to tie her shoelaces, smooth every strand of her hair, and speak to her in a voice sweet like honey. And me? I learned to tie my own hair at 8 and patch my clothes by 11. No one showed me. No one asked if I was hungry, or cold, or sad. The refrigerator in the kitchen was always covered in Haley's colorful drawings, smiling suns, clouds that winked, messy little hearts saying, "Mommy, I love you," all framed and proudly displayed. My Atlas math test? Folded into quarters and shoved into a drawer, forgotten. Every year, Haley's birthday came with a 3-tiered cake, pink ribbons, balloons, and a chalkboard that read, "Happy birthday to Mommy's princess." Mine always seemed to land when my parents were too busy. At best, a small cake rushed from the corner store and a dry, obligatory greeting, "You're older now, you should understand." Understand what? That love must be earned? That only the lovable get loved? I lost count of how many times I cleaned up the living room after Haley's tea parties with her stuffed animals. Or how many times I skipped art class to finish our group projects because Mom said, "You're the big sister, you should know how to sacrifice." The word obedient was used to erase every one of my needs. The phrase good sister was just a mask for burden. And mature became the excuse they used to overlook me. Even when I had a fever nearing 102 degrees, Mom just touched my forehead, sighed, and said, "Can you not fall sick right now? I'm focusing on Haley's dance competition." But I never blamed Haley, I never resented her. She was just a child being loved the way I should have been too. That's what hurt the most. Not that she was loved, but that I wasn't. For a long time, I thought, maybe I'm just not good enough. So I studied endlessly. I thought if I got perfect grades, won the school talent show, cleaned the entire house without being asked, maybe, just maybe, Mom would hug me once. Maybe Dad would proudly say my name at dinner. Or at the very least they'd finally see me. But their eyes always looked past me, like I was just a shadow in my own home. I lived like that for 12 years present, but invisible. Doing everything just to be acknowledged, yet never truly seen. Until the day they said, "We need to rediscover ourselves." And I once again was left behind, but this time, it was forever. They never said how long. Just told me it was temporary. Just said, "We'll come back." But from the very first second the door of the SUV slammed shut behind me, I knew there was nothing temporary about it. That knowing didn't come from logic. It came from the way my mother avoided my eyes, from my father's rushed handshake, and from the way Haley turned her head when I called her name. I stood there, under the awning of the Georgia State Foster Center, next to a woman wearing a name tag that read, "Miss Lacey," and holding a thick clipboard, completely unable to grasp what was happening. All I knew was that my chest felt hollow. And the only thing I carried with me was a thin plastic bag holding a few clothes, a math workbook, and a stuffed bear with a frayed right ear. That first day, I didn't cry. I curled up in the corner of the room, surrounded by 4 beige walls and a twin bed as hard as a school desk. I didn't touch the food tray. I didn't say a word to my roommate, a girl named Mel. I didn't feel hungry or cold, I just didn't feel anything at all. At night, I lay on my side, eyes open, staring at the ceiling until my vision blurred. Every sound felt foreign: the slamming doors, the shuffle of slippers in the hallway, the scattered laughter that seemed to come from another world. Every morning I'd ask myself, will they come today? But each night, when the list of visiting relatives was read aloud, my name, Isabelle, never appeared in any sentence. After 3 days, Miss Lacey began to worry. She called me into the counseling room, trying to coax a conversation. I only shook my head. She asked what I liked to eat. I shrugged. She placed a piece of paper and a box of crayons in front of me, told me to draw whatever I wanted. I picked up a crayon, but just sat there, my hand frozen, and eventually fell asleep on the desk like a child too exhausted to dream. She didn't scold me. She just gently laid a thin blanket over my back and stepped out, quietly closing the door behind her. And I, for the first time in my life, felt afraid. That I was starting to get used to being forgotten. I began to think, maybe I was too much. Maybe my parents were tired of me. Maybe they made the right choice, leaving the difficult one behind to be with their princess of light. I hated myself for ever hoping. Hated the cards I made for Mother's Day, the nights I stayed up decorating posters for Haley's dance competitions, the evenings I imagined them hugging me one day and saying, "You did well." Those hopes now felt like shards of glass, cutting into me every time I woke up. I was so silent, the people in the center started calling me the little ghost, not to mock me, but because they truly didn't know who I was, what I thought, or what I felt. One staff member, Daniel, once whispered to Miss Lacey, "That girl. She looks like she has no reason left to stay." I heard it. And it hurt so deeply I couldn't breathe because it was true. I started thinking about disappearing. Not dying, just vanishing completely. Not existing in anyone's memories. No one to remember, no one to call my name, no one to mention me in holiday photos. Just a speck of dust wiped away, and the world goes on unchanged. Every night, I held that worn-out teddy bear close, buried my face into its faded fur, and imagined it was the only one left who remembered I had ever existed. And I whispered to myself, if one day I survive this, if I can stand back up, I'll make sure they see that what they once called a burden was the most precious thing they ever threw away. One autumn morning, when the leaves had begun to turn gold and the air was crisper than usual, Miss Lacey led me out to the back garden of the center with a quiet whisper. "There's a couple who wants to meet you." I didn't say anything. I just lowered my head and followed, my feet crunching through dry leaves. Waiting there was a woman around 50, with soft salt and pepper curls and a chestnut sweater, and a man wearing a beret, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. They were smiling, their eyes kind. The woman knelt down to meet my gaze and said, "Hello, Isabelle. I'm Nancy, and this is Patrick. If you'd like, we could be your new home." I didn't respond. Didn't move. I just looked at the flowers, then at them, then up at the sky. I didn't believe in anything anymore. But I nodded. Not because I believed, because I was tired. A few weeks later, I moved in with them to a small house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. It was nothing like the polished, curated home of my birth parents. This one felt real, from the old armchair with a soft tear in the corner, to the kitchen that always smelled of fresh pastries and played soft jazz every afternoon. Nancy often called me Little One, even though I was 12. Patrick would ask if I wanted to learn how to fix cars, then take me into the garage and show me how he adjusted each bolt, as if I truly mattered. Every morning, I was gently woken by a soft knock and a warm glass of milk in Nancy's hand. Every evening, Patrick would ask, "Anything good happened today?" and wait patiently until I gave a real answer. No one pushed. No one brought up the past. They were just there, quiet, steady. But I wasn't so easy. Inside me, a thick wall still stood strong. Every time Nancy hugged me, I froze. Every time Patrick asked how I was, I answered in short phrases. Not because I didn't like them, but because I didn't dare believe I deserved this kind of gentleness. I began keeping a journal. On the first page, I wrote, "Why me?" On the second page, "If I had been smarter, would things have turned out differently?" And then night after night, "What if I had been prettier? What if I had stayed silent and never asked, why not Haley instead? What if I had been more obedient, quieter, smaller, would my parents have kept me?" I didn't hate Nancy and Patrick. In fact, there were moments when my heart warmed when Nancy called out to me with a smile from across the room, or when Patrick made me hot cocoa and set it by my desk when I was tired. But every time I felt happiness, I panicked. I was terrified that if I let myself believe this love was real, one day it would disappear just like the last time, when I was left behind in the cold rain, clutching a torn plastic bag, without even a single backward glance. I tried so hard to be proper, doing all my homework, keeping my room spotless, helping Nancy bake, reading books with Patrick. I wanted to prove I was a child worth keeping. But I didn't laugh. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for anything. Because deep down, I still believed I was walking a tightrope and one misstep would mean being thrown away again. One night, while Patrick dozed off on the couch and Nancy sat knitting in her armchair, I slipped out onto the front porch, sat on the steps, and opened my journal. I wrote, "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what's real, but if one day I can stand on my own, I will do something no one ever believed an abandoned child could do." That night, I wrote all the way to page 39. And for the first time in months, I felt something faint, not hope, but resolve. Something quietly flickering inside me, like a small flame in a dark room. Not enough to warm me, but just enough to keep me from vanishing. I don't know when I began stepping out of the shell of doubt. Maybe it was the night Nancy let me choose dinner for the first time and nodded, even when all I wanted was pasta with tomato sauce. Maybe it was when Patrick handed me a small wooden box and said, "Inside is a car map of Oregon. You can keep it, if you want to know the way home." Or maybe it was the day I aced my math exam, and Nancy kissed my forehead and said, "You don't have to be good to be loved, but you really are brilliant." From those small moments, I started to believe just a little that I could exist without paying for it in silence. I threw myself into studying. Not to earn grades, but to earn the right to choose my own life. I studied like knowledge was the only ladder out of the shadows. The day I received the acceptance letter from Stanford, full scholarship, economics major, I sat frozen in front of the screen for 5 full minutes. Then I cried. Not loudly. Just silent tears falling onto the keyboard. Patrick walked in, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You did it. Not to escape the past, but because you deserve a new beginning." At Stanford, I wasn't the girl with the shattered past. I was the student invited to speak in sophomore personal finance class. The only student that year nominated for the Community Impact Project award thanks to an idea I developed for a financial guidance platform tailored to teens who had grown up in the foster system. I named it Revive, not just about money, but about trust, about worth, about giving a voice to the kids who were once considered excess costs. I traveled from place to place, sharing my story at student conferences and youth mentoring programs. I stood before kids with the same eyes I had at 12 and said, "You don't need anyone to validate your worth. You just need to live long enough to validate it yourself." It was during a volunteer shift at the public library that I met Jordan, a media major who read philosophy for fun and brewed coffee the French way. I was tweaking some documents when he silently handed me a USB and said, "I cleaned up your slides. They're clearer now." I looked up, surprised. He shrugged. "Not out of pity. I just hate bad design." And I laughed for the first time in months. Jordan never asked about my past. He wasn't nosy. He didn't dig. He just showed up at the right moment, with just enough depth. When I told him I had been abandoned, he only nodded and said, "That sucks, but that's not who you are. I like how you use your pain to rebuild, not to return it." I didn't get revenge on my parents with knives, tears, or begging. I got revenge through achievement. By letting the name Isabelle show up on the front page of the student paper, in invitations from venture capital funds, and in the stunned respect of people who once looked right through me. I still remember one night when Jordan looked at me and said quietly, "You don't have to prove anything, but if you still want to, just remember you're no longer proving it to them. You're proving it to yourself." And I smiled. Not the kind of smile used to keep people at a distance, but the kind that rises from deep within. In that moment, I knew I had survived, and I was about to begin winning. I never thought I'd end up on television. Not because I didn't believe in my abilities, but because I always thought people like me, kids who were left behind, who stayed silent in rooms full of noise, were meant to exist only in the shadows, never invited into the light. But during my senior year, after presenting my community finance project at the National Youth Summit, a television producer approached me backstage. She had a voice that was both gentle and razor-sharp. She said, "Your story could change how society sees abandoned children. Do you want to tell it?" I took 2 days to think about it. Then I said yes. Not to point fingers, but to tell the kids like me, I made it, and you will too. The interview took place in a large studio in New York. They did my makeup, adjusted the microphone, taped wires along my back, but what made me tremble wasn't the camera. It was the one question I knew would come. So, what did your biological parents say when you became successful? I smiled, soft and slow. I don't know, because they never asked. And then I told the story. No embellishment, no blaming, just the truth. Abandoned at 12, taken in by Nancy and Patrick, rebuilt my life from less than nothing, and used that pain to create a platform that now helps thousands of other children. I didn't say their names, but I believed if they were still breathing, they would know they'd just been mentioned. And they did. In a small seaside town in Southern California, 1,000 miles away, inside a cramped rental house that hadn't had electricity for 3 months, Julia and Nathan were sitting in front of an old Sony television, the last item they hadn't sold. They were eating instant noodles and drinking tap water. At first, they didn't pay attention. But when the screen cut to a shot of me sitting beneath bright lights, introducing myself, Isabelle Carter, founder of Revive, teen financial literacy advocate, they froze. My father Nathan put his chopsticks down and leaned closer to the screen. My mother Julia gripped the edge of the table with trembling hands, eyes fixed on the television like she was seeing a ghost from the past. I looked so different. Long hair, a simple dark dress, composed posture, steady gaze, no longer the timid girl they had left standing in the rain. But they recognized me. Instantly. Nathan gasped, "Oh my God, is that Isabelle?" Julia didn't respond. She stood up, walked toward the television, as if getting closer could help her touch me. But I was just an image. An image smiling, sharing a childhood devoid of affection, thinking, my adoptive parents Nancy and Patrick, who taught me that I was worthy of love, no matter what my past looked like. In that damp little house, Julia began to cry, not because she was sorry, but because she realized I had made it. Without them, without naming them. Without letting them exist in the new version of my life. And in that moment, neither of them knew that what they once threw away had become the fire that could now burn down every last remnant of their old self-importance. Their home had already been flagged for foreclosure by the bank. Their jobs were gone. Nathan had been laid off from the construction company, and Julia had been unemployed for over 6 months since her travel blog collapsed after being exposed online as fake and accused of stealing donation funds. They survived by borrowing from relatives, spinning stories about being abandoned by their daughter to spark sympathy, but no one was foolish enough to keep feeding that lie. And now, as they sat there watching me appear as a symbol of rebirth, they knew the circle had closed. And they were on the outside. No one mentioned them. No one asked about them. No one remembered they had once been my parents. I hadn't needed them to build this life. And that was the harshest sentence of all. 3 days after the interview aired, I received an email. The subject line was simple. From Mom. No full name, no real apology. Just a short paragraph, as if it had been written in haste or maybe prepared long ago, waiting for the right moment. Isabelle, we've made many mistakes. But no matter what, you're still our daughter. Blood ties don't change. We should reunite, find our way back, because family is the most important thing. I hope there's still a soft corner in your heart for your parents. Let the past rest. I believe in forgiveness. I read to the last line, then quietly took a screenshot and saved it into a folder titled, For the Record. I didn't reply, I didn't need to, and I didn't soften. Because even in that so-called apology, they were still clinging to a role on the stage, casting themselves as the poor souls who made mistakes instead of the ones who deliberately left me behind. I didn't see remorse. I saw a desperate attempt to wedge themselves into the light of a life they had long abandoned now that they were tired of the dark they'd chosen for themselves. A week later, they began commenting on my public posts. My mother's account, Julia L., appeared beneath a post about the Revive Center. So proud of our daughter. Congratulations, Isabelle, your family is always behind you. I blocked her. No hesitation. The next day, my father's account Nathan Callie commented under a photo of me and Jordan at a new project launch. Love and support from Dad. Always watching, even if you don't look back. I blocked him too. But they didn't stop. I started receiving strange messages from friends. Isabelle, someone messaged me asking about you. Got a weird account sending old pictures of you, said it was from when the family was still happy. Has for Lieben. One friend from my startup team called me late at night, confused. Should we respond to this person? They said they're your parents. They want to share some old photos to inspire the project. I gripped my phone tighter. A part of me had known this would happen eventually. But I didn't expect them to be this cunning, slipping into the role of victims, slowly dripping guilt into people around me, painting themselves as a broken couple undone by one thing. A daughter who got successful and forgot her roots. One day, I was called into the office by the HR director's assistant. She placed a printed email in front of me. I read the first line. Hello. I'm the mother of Isabelle Carter. We're concerned about the changes in our daughter's behavior after so many years apart. If the company feels it's necessary, I'd be happy to provide more information on family medical history, upbringing. I set the paper down, hands trembling. But this time, it wasn't fear, it was fury. It was clear they didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control of the narrative. When they couldn't be the loved ones, they chose to be the victims. When they couldn't take the spotlight, they crept in from the shadows. I stood up, looked the HR officer in the eye, and said, "They're no longer my family. If any more emails come from them, please forward them directly to my attorney." She nodded, asked nothing more. I went home, sat at my desk, and reopened the first email from Julia. I read each line again, pausing on the white space between the words. Then I opened my journal, the one I'd kept all these years, and wrote a single sentence. If back then I needed my parents and they weren't there, then today, when they need me, I won't be coming. I closed the journal. What I felt wasn't anger, it was something colder, finality. Because family isn't a leash. No one gets to come back just because they're drowning. Not after everything. Not after all those years. Not when I've already learned how to live without them. I thought that after blocked emails, deleted comments, and returned messages, they would give up. That my silence, my cold, unwavering silence, would be enough to keep the past from ever prying its way back open. But I underestimated them. When pride is gone, people will turn themselves into anything, even beggars, waving the family flag. One crisp autumn morning, I received a large envelope from a law office in California. At first, I assumed it was partnership paperwork for a new nonprofit. But the moment I opened it, I froze. The top document, in bold type, read, "Notice of legal action, petition for financial support from blood relatives." Signed at the bottom, Julia and Nathan Carter. My biological parents. I read each line like swallowing stones. They accused me of neglecting both moral and legal responsibilities toward her parents, claiming that, despite past conflicts, Isabelle remains the biological daughter of the plaintiffs, and, under the Family Financial Support Act, she is obligated to assist them in times of severe hardship. In the attached documents, they listed unemployment, foreclosure, depression, and temporary housing with relatives. Not a single line mentioned that they abandoned me at age 12. I didn't panic. I didn't rage. I quietly picked up the phone and called my attorney Rosemary, legal advisor for Revive and the same woman who first read my adoption file years ago. I said just one sentence. "They're suing me. Because I didn't raise them." She didn't sound surprised, just sighed and asked me to send over every document, every record, anything I had kept. And I had everything. I had a copy of my legal adoption certificate from the state of Oregon clearly stating that my legal guardians were Nancy and Patrick Miller. I had photographs of my biological parents vacationing around the world after abandoning me, alongside a blog post written by my mother that read, "We chose to let go of everything that tied us down in order to rediscover ourselves. The cost is high, but freedom is never cheap." Oh, I had screenshots of their fake, pleading emails, their public comments calling me our pride after more than a decade of silence. And most important of all, I had a signed affidavit from Nancy and Patrick who witnessed my abandonment and personally signed my medical file at age 13 when no biological relative came to pick me up after a minor accident at school. On the day of the hearing, I sat silently in the courtroom. Julia wore a charcoal gray dress, looking hollow but still had eyeliner on. Nathan showed up in a wrinkled suit, hair freshly dyed. They sat across from me, their eyes trying to mimic sadness, guilt, and some fabricated sense of parental duty. I didn't look at them. I looked straight at the judge, a sharp, composed older woman with steady eyes. When the plaintiffs finished their argument, leaning heavily on biological ties and moral obligations, my attorney rose, placing a thick folder of documents before the court. She spoke for just 3 minutes. "Your Honor, this child Isabelle did not reject responsibility. She was never given the opportunity to have any. Abandoned at age 12. No visitation, no financial support. No communication." Meanwhile, the plaintiffs enjoyed a carefree life with their second daughter, raised donations from the public, and manipulated sympathy through a dishonest narrative. They didn't look for her for 12 years. Only when she found success did they appear. Not out of love, but out of need, and we have evidence for all of it. The court recessed for 10 minutes. Then the judge returned, her voice firm and clear. "The court rejects the petition. There is no legal basis to compel the defendant to support the plaintiffs. The law protects parents who have demonstrated care, upbringing, assistance, and who did not abandon their children. A child who is abandoned has no legal responsibility to support the parents who discarded her." Julia gasped and covered her mouth. Nathan dropped his head to the table. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt just. And perhaps, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly stood on the side of what was right. As we exited the courtroom, Rosemary placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Not everyone who gives birth to you is family. Today, you ended a bloodline and opened a soul line." I stepped outside. The air was crisp. But inside me everything felt warm enough, because I knew, from this moment on, no one could ever use the word parent to make me bow my head again. I had been silent for more than 10 years, silent when they left me behind, silent when they pretended to repent, silent even when they dragged me to court with trembling voices and a lawsuit soaked in moral pretense. But after that verdict, as I walked out of the courthouse into the blazing Portland sun, I knew it was time to speak. Not to retaliate, but to reclaim the story that belonged to me. 3 days later, I turned on the camera, set it up right in my home office, in front of a bookshelf, soft daylight casting shadows on one side of my face. No background music, no flashy edits. Just me and a story that had been distorted for far too long. I began with the truth. My name is Isabelle Carter. I'm the founder of Revive, a financial education platform for teens who grew up in the foster care system. But before I had a Stanford scholarship, before Revive, before the job, before the love, I was once a child left in the rain, holding a torn plastic bag, abandoned by the very people who gave birth to me. I told everything from how I was placed in foster care at 12, to the years I lived in silence, and then how I was adopted by Nancy and Patrick, 2 people who shared no blood with me, but showed me what unconditional love truly looked like. I spoke about the journey of education, the haunting need to constantly prove that I was worthy of being loved. I talked about how my birth parents returned, pretended to repent, and then sued me for not giving them money when they were unemployed. I never said their names. But I told enough that anyone with a sense of reason could see what had really happened. And at the end of the video, I looked straight into the lens, my voice steady now. If you're watching this, and you've ever been abandoned, ever been labeled a burden, ever questioned whether you were even meant to be here, I want you to know. You are not worthless, they just weren't worthy of your love. And you don't need blood to have a family. I hit publish and turned off the camera. Within 24 hours, the video had passed 3 million views. My inbox was flooded with messages. The comments poured in without stopping. I was the kid left at grandma's house. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. I cried when you said, you are not worthless. They deserve to be exposed. You're the reason I no longer think of myself as a mistake. But then, it didn't stop at emotion. Some internet users, especially groups that expose scammers on social media, began digging into Julia and Nathan Carter's past, and what they uncovered was a dumpster fire. One Twitter user posted, "Wait, isn't this the couple who crowdfunded a global trip back in 2012 under the pretense of losing their child and searching for healing? Here's the blog link." Others found my mother's old travel blog photos of dinners in France, yoga on Bali beaches, captions like, letting go of burdens to breathe with the universe. Under each post was a GoFundMe link. Support a grieving couple find light again. I didn't say a word. But the internet didn't stop. Reddit exploded with threads exposing them. Julia had allegedly borrowed money from a community organization and vanished. Nathan once ran a travel company and reportedly abandoned clients mid-tour, disappearing with their payments. Former friends and colleagues chimed in. I always had doubts about the missing child story. So, they abandoned their daughter, then spun the grieving parents' narrative to milk sympathy. People who had donated were furious. Some threatened lawsuits for emotional fraud. Platforms like GoFundMe began reviewing Julia and Nathan's full fundraising history. As for me, I stayed quiet. Saturday on the balcony of my apartment, holding a cup of hot cocoa, watching the rain, not the rain from when I was 12, but today's rain. A clean rain, one that didn't taste like tears. Nancy called and simply asked, "Are you okay?" I smiled. I'm being defended. For the first time, it's not me who has to carry the weight alone. My nation's that media storm wasn't something I created. But I sparked it, and this time, what moved people wasn't flowery words, wasn't shallow morality. It was the truth. Just a girl who was once abandoned. Standing up, and telling her story. And when that light spread, no one could hide in the shadows anymore. That weekend, while I was organizing training materials for a workshop at the Revive Center, a colleague scrolling through her phone suddenly exclaimed, "Isabelle, have you seen this?" I walked over and looked at her screen. The Reddit headline read, GoFundMe terminates Julia and Nathan Carter's account for fraud and misinformation. I stared at the words, then quietly sat down. A few days later, the media followed. Once, inspirational travel bloggers accused of abandoning daughter and defrauding donors. The Carter family, from healing icons to hollow illusion, daughter breaks silence behind happy family photos. The conversation was no longer a whisper, it was a wave. It crashed down, ripping off the mask they had so carefully held onto all these years. Julia's Instagram account, once followed by over 30,000 people for its beachside, yoga poses, and faux spiritual quotes, now had only a few hundred. Her old posts were flooded with comments. This is the woman who abandoned her kid? Shame on the word mother. Return the money to the people you manipulated. The travel blog was wiped clean. GoFundMe issued a formal statement suspending all campaigns associated with them, freezing the account, and launching an internal investigation. A message came to my phone from Haley, the little sister I once looked up to like a stage spotlight. It was short. They're living in a car now, no one will take them in. I didn't reply. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victorious. Only a strange emptiness, as if the wall I'd built for years to keep out the pain suddenly had no reason to exist anymore. I knew they were living in an old car parked behind a lot on Portland's west side, avoiding the public eye. An old friend of my mother's posted on Facebook. I once gave them shelter, but after everything, I can't enable the lies any longer. They're not sorry, they're just angry they got caught. Nathan had called my aunt someone I haven't spoken to in years, begging for a place to stay, claiming Isabelle made everything up. My aunt hung up after 2 sentences and later told me, her voice unusually sharp with disdain. They're not parents, they're failed actors looking for a stage. End quote. One evening, I drove to the northern coast of Portland. The air was cool, clouds thick, but the sea still shimmered with a light of its own. I brought my old journal, the one I'd started back when I first moved in with Nancy. The last page I'd written was when I was 17, the handwriting messy, uncertain. One day, I'll forgive, or maybe I won't. But either way, I won't carry them anymore. I tore the page out, stood before the ocean, and let the wind take it. Not to erase the memory, but to release it from my heart. I didn't feel joy in their downfall. I didn't need them to hurt so I could feel powerful. But I needed them to know some losses are permanent. And this time, no one is turning back to bring them home. I got in the car, shut the door, took a deep breath, and whispered, "It's done." 1 year later. I live in Portland now, in a small house tucked beside a line of pines, with a vegetable garden behind the kitchen, sun-warmed wooden steps, and windows that welcome the early morning light. In the mornings, I brew coffee for Jordan, kiss him gently on the cheek while he's still half asleep. In the afternoons, I go to the Lighthouse, a new counseling and support center for teens rejected by their families, opened last year by me and the Revive team. There, I'm not the CEO of a $1 million startup or the inspirational face in magazines. There, I'm just Miss Isabelle, the one who listens, who teaches how to write scholarship emails, who catches tearful eyes and places new chances gently into their hands. The kids call me the first adult who didn't make us be perfect to be loved. Oh, quote. And I hold on to that sentence, like a red thread tying me back to the 12-year-old girl in the rain with a torn plastic bag, no one turning back, no one calling her name. I don't think much about Julia and Nathan anymore. They're a chapter that's been closed, worn, misshapen, but not torn out. I keep it as a marker that sometimes we have to be cast out of what we thought was home to find the place that truly calls our name. One evening, Jordan and I sat on the porch while a light rain fell. Warm wine in our hands, soft jazz playing from the little speaker. He turned to me, half teasing, half serious. "If you could go back, would you want them to see how far you've come?" I looked at him, took a breath, smiled quietly. "They already have, and now they have to live with it. Forever. I don't need their recognition. I don't need the belated nod of those who once chose absence. I have my own stage now. Not to perform, but to live. Freely, fully, and with no one left to carry on my back." This final part is for you, the one watching this video, maybe sitting quietly in a room where no one asks what you need. Where you've been called selfish, difficult, too sensitive, simply because you wanted to be seen, heard, loved. I want you to know this. Being abandoned was not your fault. Being dismissed doesn't mean you lack worth. And just because no one sees you doesn't mean you're invisible. You don't need anyone's badge of approval. You don't need blood to have a family. You don't have to play the easy one just to keep a crooked kind of love. You can build your own stage. Step onto it. Stand tall. And if you must, step off it before someone else pushes you down. And if you've ever been treated like a tool only useful when needed, leave a comment below. I don't carry anyone anymore. I'll read every single one. And I'll remember that we are not alone, not meaningless, and no longer bound by any past that tried to erase us.